The protein synthesis simulation AI you developed just figured out a cure for cancer. Now, how do you bring it to the world? Today, you'll find out why storytelling moves mountains and how to effectively communicate your data to affect positive change. Welcome back to the final episode of my series for Suraj Raval's Data Lit course. Now, I'm sad to tell you there's no coding tutorial here. In fact, this episode is going to be entirely non-technical. If you're watching this video, chances are pretty high you're interested in the field of data science. But what is it that drives you to learn? I certainly hope you enjoy math, coding, and technical problem solving. Otherwise, you're very much in the wrong profession. There's also the money. There are lots of high-paying job opportunities and market opportunities to create unimaginable wealth as an entrepreneur. But aside from money, what is it that you really want to accomplish in the field of data science? For me, it's about making an impact on the world and creating innovations that fundamentally improve the way people live. But for me to have achieved anything, it requires that people adopt my innovation, which means changing behavior and habits. Back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, monstrous mainframes ruled, and most ordinary people had no thoughts whatsoever of owning a computer. An old-timer at IBM brought up the idea of developing a consumer model which ordinary people could use at home. Everyone in the committee meeting just laughed. What use would an average family have for a computer? The only idea anyone could come up with was to store cooking recipes. And of course, fast forward 2 decades and personal computers have become completely ubiquitous. Most of us today can't even imagine living without a computer and internet connection. But an idea which revolutionized the world was not at first easily accepted and needed to be sold. So technical innovation is one skill set of geniuses, and the power of human influence is another skill set of geniuses. And the few that possess both really have the power to move the world. Crunching numbers for the sake of crunching numbers is quite a lame gig. That's why I flunked out of most math classes in school and finally learned on my own after I found a practical use. Literally, a couple years ago, I saw that neural network AI was about to completely revolutionize the world and wanted to learn how they worked. That's when I found Suraj's channel and started cramming on essential math to be able to read research papers and understand the algorithms well enough to innovate on them. My point is that as a data scientist, you are ultimately crunching numbers for the purpose of solving human problems and changing behavior to improve life. And your number crunching will have been in complete vain if people don't adopt the solutions you come up with. So this is a lesson not just about how to use data to tell a story, but about how to be an effective influencer, sway hearts and minds, and get your ideas adopted. One solid fact that may come as a shock to the left-brain analytical types in data science is that the vast majority of humans make decisions based on emotions and only justify them with logic. In our field, we are trained to think with raw data and make sense of it. But if you present nothing but data and statistics to the average person, their eyes will simply glaze over. To change human behavior, you've got to command attention, and that is done by invoking emotions and taking your audience on a journey. And the way to do that is through storytelling. Statistics and logic on their own are cold and hard to relate to, but paint a dramatic picture of how they impact an ordinary person's life, and all of a sudden the data comes to life and your audience gets it. Emotions are so powerful they can often completely short-circuit logic. So this is a double-edged sword. At the bottom of the barrel of the scum of the earth are the unscrupulous individuals who have mastered the art of emotional manipulation used to get people to accept illogical and destructive agendas. Politicians do this endlessly, and mainstream media is very much complicit. Look at the plague of communism that has killed millions in the Soviet Union and China alone. What is the real cause of war? How could anyone possibly justify 2 countries destroying each other as productive or beneficial? It's all done by emotional manipulation. But once you learn how it's done, you can actually see straight through it. The one time I got duped in a scam was by a powerful storyteller. I was waiting at a crosswalk and a professional-looking man came up to me. He looked quite panicked, so I asked him what was going on. And he was half sobbing, and he told me that he worked in an office building across the street, and he had just received the news that his daughter had been in a bad car accident and was in the hospital. and he wanted to go there to make sure she was okay, but he had forgotten his wallet at home and needed to borrow $25 for the taxi fare. Now, the guy was in authentic tears. He gave me his phone number. I told me the name of the company he worked for, the office suite that was in the building just across the street from where I was. So since I didn't have a $5, I loaned him $40 and made arrangements to drop by the office later that afternoon, and he would pay me back. And so I'm walking into a mall to grab lunch in the food court, and the guy is following me, waiting for me to fork over the cash. So I give him the money, he shakes my hand, thanks me immensely, and then heads towards the exit. My first warning sign that I had been duped was when I turned around 30 seconds later and saw 2 security guards escorting the guy out of the mall. So I caught up with the guards later and asked them what was up, and it turns out that guy scams people all day and has been banned from entering the mall. And of course the phone number was fake, and so is the company he claimed to work at. So I felt totally burned, but at the same time I was awed by the emotional manipulation skills which the guy had obviously practiced and honed quite a bit. I felt so bad about having a daughter in the hospital I made a split-second decision without thinking logically. Painful, but a learning experience easily worth $40. So just as emotion can be manipulated for bad, it is also an essential tool for catalyzing constructive change in the world. I'll give you an example. In the early 1990s, Thailand was facing an HIV epidemic, and unbelievable numbers of married men and their wives were testing positive. The government quickly traced the primary source of infection back to the prostitution industry. A very alarming percentage of prostitutes tested positive, and unsurprisingly, this was tied to a lack of condom use. So the Thai government did what governments do best, and it printed up hundreds of thousands of pamphlets explaining the dangers of STDs and how to prevent them with condom use. The problem kept getting worse. Then came the safe sex education classes with monetary incentive to show up. Still nothing. The problem was that condom use was not popular among the customers, and women who insisted on it would lose business as the men would go elsewhere. Realizing the full scope of the death and destruction which would occur if nothing was done about the problem, a bold woman stepped up to the plate with a bold solution. Since getting rid of the world's oldest profession wasn't a realistic option, she had to transform prostitution from an every woman for herself mentality into a sisterhood. All the prostitutes had to unite together and refuse service without condom use, and leave men with nowhere else to go. No cover, no lover, no protection, bye-bye erection. She started in her hometown and called all the prostitutes into a meeting, even the underground ones the government couldn't get to. The HIV-infected women from the same small town told their story, how they never thought it would happen to them, but it did. And in the early 1990s, HIV was a total death sentence, and agonizing at that. So where logic and statistics were unrelatable, personal stories penetrated like a knife. The women realized they were vulnerable, and most of them would eventually die miserably unless they banded together to insist all their customers use condoms. And this time it worked. So the successful action of creating a sisterhood and getting prostitutes afflicted by HIV to tell their story to others was repeated throughout all of Thailand. In 1989, just 14% of prostitutes used condoms. By 1994, this had increased to 94%. In addition, a quarter of prostitutes had left the profession altogether, partly because of the health risks and partly because of improved economic opportunities in other areas. So the moral of the story is that if you want people to take action based on your data, you've got to wrap it in a compelling emotional story that is relatable to your audience. Just like any tool, emotion can be used for good and bad. Money can be used for good and bad. AI can be used for good and bad. We prevent the AI apocalypse by getting as many well-intentioned people into the field as possible. If you have good intentions, then you should arm yourself with as many tools as possible to do good in the world and hold in check those who wish to manipulate and harm. So how do you tell an effective story which influences decision makers to take positive, constructive action? It's simple. 1. Watch the masters at work. I'm talking about the most talented influencers in the world. 2. Notice the specific techniques and details which make their presentation so effective. 3. Adopt them to your own style and personality. And 4. Practice, practice, practice until you can deliver your message flawlessly with the intended emotional impact and inspire your audience to take the desired action. Where do you find the masters? Well, there's obvious people to study like John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. And then there's TED Talks, which delivers bite-sized, highly impactful presentations from many of the masters of present day. Presenters range from the rich and powerful Bill Gates to young children from African villages you've never heard of who are pioneers of local change. One technique I highly recommend, which I call channeling greatness, is finding a specific soundbite that really impacts or inspires you. It could be a real-world speech, or it could be a dialogue from a movie with outstanding acting. Start with something short, like 30 seconds or a minute. Your job is to duplicate it while channeling the emotion, energy, and soul of the speaker as close as possible. First, focus on matching the overall tone and energy, then master nuances like strategic pauses, rhythm, and inflection. You can work with a partner and coach each other to get better and better. Done thoroughly and done right, this exercise will help you find a source of energy, which you can then make your own and become a powerful communicator in your own authentic way. This is also an incredible exercise if you consider yourself introverted or find it hard to communicate or be emotionally engaging. I'll link a playlist in the description with a few of my own favorite sound bites. I learned this from a mentor of mine named Blair Singer when I was doing public speaking training. Moving on, let's go over a few tips for effective and powerful storytelling. This comes from an excellent blog post by Naomi Chibana, who analyzes what the most effective TED speakers have in common and links to some amazing examples. She totally hits the nail on the head, as every time I've been enthralled with a speaker and motivated to take action, the presentation has had these 7 points in common. I'm going to briefly summarize my takeaways, and I highly encourage you to read the article and review the video examples yourself. Technique number 1, immerse your audience in a story. If you want to have impact, you need the attention of your audience, and people are naturally distracted, especially in the age of smartphones. What's the number one way to retain your audience's attention, short of prying their eyes open like in Clockwork Orange? Immerse your audience in a story and transport them to another realm. The idea is to invoke not just emotion and adrenaline, but as many sensory perceptions as possible. Paint a colorful picture for them to look at. Also weave in some sound, touch, and smell. You can also add to this with visuals of your slides. When you're telling stories, keep the words on the screen to a minimum and use visuals which complement your words rather than repeat them. Number 2, tell a personal story. The most captivating kind of story is a personal one which the audience can relate to, especially stories with a theme of triumph over extreme adversity. There are a few basic plots with universal appeal which you can learn about in Christopher Booker's book, The 7 Basic Plots. You'll find these not only in blockbuster movies and novels, but also weaved into the most powerful and moving presentations ever given. As a data scientist, you're likely dealing with very broad statistics, but what you can do is find a handful of personal experiences which are representative of your overall data. Let's say you're giving a presentation about how rollout of wireless internet in Africa has dramatically reduced poverty. You want investors to put up money to bring this to more people. Well, bring in a handful of stories of children whose lives have been transformed. Even better, introduce them on a live Skype call. Technique number 3, create suspense. What's the number one thing that makes a book impossible to put down or a movie impossible to leave? First, get your audience emotionally invested in the characters. Next, create some conflict and buildup. Now, leave them hanging about what happens next. Suspense can be created by steadily building up to a climactic conclusion. It can also be done by jumping straight into the climactic action at the very beginning, only to cut away to the past to reveal the details of how the situation transpired. A third technique is to start telling a predictable story only to take a completely different turn from what was expected. Number 4, bring characters to life. A big part of what makes a story captivating is the depth of the characters. People get bored of their own lives and find immense enjoyment living vicariously through the adventures of others. You want to make your characters relatable, but also make them interesting with an uncommon characteristic. Number 5, show, don't tell. Telling your audience about an event in a story is one thing. Actually transporting them into the event with full sensory perception is a whole other world that the masters of influence are especially gifted with. Use dialogue rather than narration. Construct events scene by scene. Also consider using props, visuals, and sound effects to increase the impact of your presentation. Technique number 6, build up to a star moment. Star means something they'll always remember. This can come in the form of a dramatization, provocative images, or shocking statistics. A great example of this was an American manufacturing company in Indonesia, which was accused of causing serious pollution in a local river. The CEO had the water discharge analyzed by a lab and had data proving it was clean, but angry locals were ready to lynch the entire management team regardless. The CEO held a press conference right in front of the discharge pipe. In addition to reporting the lab results, he held a glass of water in the discharge stream from the factory and then drank it in front of the crowd. Like an exorcised ghost, the accusation simply disappeared and the company continued to benefit the local economy with high-paying jobs. Which brings us to the final technique, number 7, end with a positive takeaway. Effective presentations not only tell an engaging story with relatable characters, conflict, and a climax, but they also end with a positive resolution. In the process of overcoming adversity, the star characters receive a spark of wisdom or a lesson learned, which helps them overcome obstacles and change for the better. And all the better if you can turn this into a catchy viral slogan short enough that it can go wild on Twitter. One of my favorite examples of this not only changed the attitude of an entire nation, but also catapulted mankind to the stars. This is the culmination of the very famous 1962 speech by John F. Kennedy. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Pop culture seeks instant gratification and an easy life. But this is a very shallow, unfulfilling way to live. True satisfaction in life comes from taking on challenges, accomplishing what is difficult, and triumphing in spite of the odds. Exactly what makes for a captivating story. So if you want to live an amazing life, start writing your story now. Again, the blog article goes into a lot more detail and links to numerous examples of each technique being amazingly executed. So I encourage you to spend some time going through them. In summary, the technical ability to transform data into innovative solutions is a skill we've taught in this course, and I hope we've given you a good grasp of what is possible. Influencing people to adopt the solutions is a whole other realm of skill that is worth developing as a data scientist, especially if you're an entrepreneur or seek a high-level leadership role in a company. Storytelling is probably the single most effective method to turn your technical innovations into a force that transforms the world. If you're a strongly analytical person, this may be uncomfortable for you, but you can develop the skills of charisma and influence with practice. A great way to start is by finding sound bites which excite you from amazing speakers or actors and duplicating them with full energy. I've left a playlist with some of my favorite examples in the description. In fact, if you'd like to record your version of one or more sound bites and link it in the comments below, I'd love to give it a listen. And before I go, I want to leave you with one last bonus assignment. The task is to find some interesting statistics which shock you or inspire you. Find one or two personal stories related to the subject and record an engaging 5-minute presentation with a positive takeaway at the end. All you need is a microphone, a slideshow, and some free screencast software. Upload the video to YouTube and link to it in the comments below. We'll set the due date as Tuesday, April 30th, and the winner will get not only a huge shout out, but we're going to embed your entry into a bonus lesson of this course. Well, we're now reaching the end of the Data Lit course. I hope you've got a lot of value, have a solid grasp of the basics, and are inspired by all that machine learning is making possible. This is Colin Scow, and I hope to see you back soon for the next step on your journey to master artificial intelligence and innovate algorithms which change the world.